Welcome to Everyday Economics, the podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, CEO of the 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics, a production of America's Talking Network, and you can subscribe to all of our podcasts at americastalking.com. To support Everyday Economics, please make a tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description and joining me, as always, the great one, Dr. Orphe Divounguy, PhD economist, and budding EV fan. I want to talk to you about the world of electric vehicles. I want to talk about it, though, through the frame, not necessarily of whether they're a good idea, whether they're a bad idea. Do they make sense in this economy right now? And what might we expect to see in the EV market in the months and years ahead? You and I had a somewhat spirited text exchange about EVs last night. You had said that you had had an opportunity to sit in the new Mercedes EQS. I won't steal your thunder. You could just tell the audience what you had said to me.
Listen, I love it. I absolutely love it. It's a great car. I like all electric cars? Absolutely not. But there's something about that Mercedes-Benz EQS or even the EQE sedan or SUV. You know, they're really well done. They're super fast, and they save you a ton of money. In this day and age, with all of the incentives that are out there to get in one of those cars, there's huge savings to be had. And then, of course, the fact that, as you pointed out, in some markets, those cars are not selling very rapidly. And by the way, I don't think it's necessarily an EV problem. I think in general, we're at a point where, with inflation where it's at, with interest rates where they're at, where basically, you finance a car and you're having to pay north of 7% interest rates, right? You're going to have to see a slowdown in car buying activity. And so it's not necessarily, I don't think it's necessarily the EV, but yeah, in some markets, EVs are not quite popular, are not very popular yet. EVs are facing headwinds with the fact that, you may not have enough charging stations, or that you may find it difficult to find one. You still have these issues in parts of the country, but ultimately that also means that there are great deals to be had. If you go to a dealership that's struggling to sell their EVs, they will give you some amazing discounts. And just a personal anecdote, I am, negotiating. I think I managed to negotiate down the price of a car down something like 21% with just, a bunch of text messages. And so, I mean, you can do it in some markets where these cars are not selling very rapidly. But I think ultimately, look, in 2023, EV sales were up 35% year over year, right? And so electric cars accounted for about 18% of all cars sold in 2023, up from 14% in 2022. So it's on the way up. It's just that the pace is slowing. The adoption rate, right? The pace of adoption is kind of slowing. Is kind of why I think a lot of people are concerned, and why I think we see all these headlines, these doom and gloom headlines everywhere.
Let's bring this back to economics and supply and demand. There was a tremendous amount of policy pressure placed on automakers to move to more electric vehicles. And so I think some of that technology was expedited, and put on the road. And what we're seeing right now with regard to the opportunity to negotiate for an electric vehicle, which, by the way, is still subsidized in most cases at $7,500 at the federal level, with additional dollars being subsidized at the state level in certain states, that the demand is not there. The supply is plentiful. When you and I were trading messages back and forth last night, I mean, some of the examples that stick out to me would be, in particular, with Ford and Ford Motor Company. I mean, per cars.com last night, there are 229,000 unsold vehicles on dealer lots or arriving at dealer lots coming from Ford. And a significant number of them, I mean, almost 10,000 of them are one particular model, the Mach-E Mustang, which right now across the board appears to have incentives on it that are in the 25% range.
Right. Maybe no one likes that car, right? I mean, look, ultimately, we have to understand why there are subsidies, right? Are there subsidies because there's no demand for EVs? I don't think so. I think the subsidies are there because China has taken over the EV market and that we have to just, on a global scale, remain competitive. And that's probably why the subsidies are there. Whether or not I do agree, though, that demand lags supply by a lot, by miles, right? Which is why dealers are willing to give away these cars almost. You're right in the sense that the demand is just not there yet. And big word here is yet, right? Just not there yet. The EV share of total new vehicle sales up in the first quarter of 2024, 7.3%. So continuing to increase, right? But increasing at a much slower pace, right? EV sales volumes in Q1 were up 46% in Q1 of 2023. So like much higher in 23 when compared to 22, increasing in 24, but increasing at a much slower pace is what's out there. And you're right. In some parts of the country, the demand is just not there compared to the amount of supply that's out there, right? Which is why you see the easing price growth, which is why you see the share of dealers with discounts on these cars increasing, right? And why they're giving some of those away. I think there's going to be winners and losers too, right? You're going to have some car. I mean, we saw Tesla cutting their prices. You're going to have some manufacturers doing really, really well. And then you're going to have some manufacturers doing absolutely poorly because they didn't execute well, despite all the incentives, despite all that stuff, all the support that they're getting to get more EVs on the road. So, yeah, I think that's the thing, right? So they're also expensive cars. Let's be honest. And so maybe there's going to need to be a price adjustment when you increase the supply as much as we have, and and demand for the stuff is slow to come because, people prefer to hold on to what they know. Some people are afraid, because they don't find charging stations that often. I remember, first of all, I don't drive an EV. I'm in the market. I'm looking, I'm willing to experiment a little bit, but I rented one on my family vacation 3 months ago. And maybe I was unlucky. I got myself into a Tesla Model Y that, had a problem with the battery, right? And basically, the battery was draining every hour or so. I had to find these charging stations everywhere. It was daunting. It was scary. I was with the kids in the car. And usually I would fuel up once and that'd be good for the rest of the day, right? Or for the whole week, for my whole trip. And then all of a sudden, we had to slow down. We were going to an event. We're in Florida going to NASA. We were going to try to do this NASA tour, and we ended up missing our tour. And we were so disappointed by the whole experience that I got out of that car and I said, I'm never buying one of those ever. Right. And I think there's a lot of people that have had that experience. But let's be real. EV's here to stay. It's the way of the future. The incentives are probably going to go away eventually, too. Right. As more and more people adopt the technology. But because demand so far lags supply, maybe right now is a great time to get the best deal ever on your EV. Right. Also, those cars last longer. They have better maintenance records, right? So less need for maintenance over a long period of time. With Electrify America, you can get an EV today and pay $0 out of pocket. You get a lease today on an EV and pay $0 to charge your car for 3 years, right? I mean, the savings are. I mean, you know what it's like to go to Costco and wait on the long line to fuel up. And you're spending hundreds of dollars every month to fuel up your car. And so there's appeal to this stuff. It's just there's a slow adoption rate, probably because, first, they don't make very beautiful EVs out there today, except for the Mercedes-Benz that we talked about on the podcast. They're not very beautiful cars. Those batteries are also very heavy. right? So like, if you're looking at a Mercedes SUV, gas SUV, like their GLE models, and you compare that to the EQE models or EQS, the GLE is so much better all around. However, the EQE will save you a ton of money, right? The electric model will save you a ton of money. And so that's kind of where people are at. It's not a clear-cut decision quite yet, but there's a ton of supply. And that supply is causing price growth to ease in that space. And it's I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing.
I'm not going to argue with your point of view, and I'm not anti EV. And I think that people should have the freedom to choose the vehicle that they want makes sense for them. I will just tell you this, and I can't speak on behalf of all Midwesterners or people who don't live on the coasts. There's a certain amount of impracticality around the EV, in particular with long distance travel. Number one. Number two, I think when you and I talk about the economy is not numbers, it's not dollars, it's people. And inside of the personal decisions that people are making right now, there is a reasonable interim step, and that is to gas hybrid. And I think that Toyota has absolutely hit it out of the park with the way that they've mapped out their near-term future. They're not an anti-EV company. They're making EVs. But right now they're selling a lot of cars. And for those people who are out there that are looking for a new vehicle, you are not going to find massive incentives on Toyota hybrid vehicles, because you're going to get a car that's well built, that has, Toyota's brand commitment to it, right? And that car is not going to leave you hanging. And I think there's a psyche. I think we're skipping a step in the United States of thinking like going from gas combustion directly to EV. I think the interim step is hybrid. I think it makes a lot more sense to the people who are making these decisions for themselves.
That's right. Exactly. I think you're spot on that hybrid is kind of like for people like myself who don't own an electric vehicle yet, that hybrid, middle step, getting used and comfortable with this, and then you have to adopt all this new technology. You got to figure out how to charge this thing. Like you got to buy a charger, and then if you want to use the Tesla chargers that are, by the way, there's more of them on the road, but you don't have a Tesla, you got to have some sort of adapter, right? And all of this stuff is just too much, right, for most people. But ultimately, when they do the math, right, and if it comes down to dollars and cents, the EV saves you a ton of money, right? And so, but we got to get people there. Also, let's be honest, not many EV manufacturers make beautiful cars, not yet anyway, right? So they all look like weird spaceships. And I don't think we're quite ready for that yet. So yeah, I think we touched on a couple points here that are very valid and important. And that transition to electric vehicles is going to be slow. There was kind of that novelty factor at first. And those who could afford it just went out and got them. Now the price has to come down a lot for the Midwest to adopt them. The chargers have to be just all over the place, right? Because, people drive very long distances in the Midwest, like you pointed out. And it's going to be a little while longer before the middle of the country really starts to adopt, the full electric vehicle.
I appreciate your thoughts as always. For Dr. Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other quality podcasts at americastalking.com.
Some people would call him a loser. He ran for state office. He was beaten. He started a business. He failed. He ran for Congress. He lost. He was nominated for vice president. He lost again. But he knew only those who never tried are the real losers. And Abraham Lincoln was no loser. Persistence. Pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com.